All right, Tammy. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much for being on mine and having me be on yours. I love these podcast swaps. It's fun.
Yes, it's fun. We've been friends on Facebook forever.
And this is the first time we've ever talked.
Yes, and it's neat to see how much like our clients have in common.
Oh, I know. I know. I was trying to think how you and I even met, and I'm sure it's just because our circles overlap so much, you
Yes,
know?
yeah, but I'm excited to talk to you about all things fibromyalgia today.
Awesome. That's what I'm here for.
Yes. Yeah. So, you are the founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute.
That
Uh,
is correct.
yeah. Can you share a little bit about how that happened and how you
Yeah.
started working with folks with fibromyalgia?
Yeah, absolutely. So the story actually starts with my diagnosis. I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, I don't know, about 6 months after I was married. So it was in early 2007 that I was diagnosed. And everything just kind of went downhill pretty quick until
Mm.
my doctor introduced me to a health coach in 2009, and that's everything turned around, and I would not be where I am today without that. So of course I decided that I wanted to work that kind of magic for people as well, so became a coach myself in 2009. I started, working with, at first, anybody, but found that like my magic sweet spot really was fibromyalgia. I describe it like a burning bush moment. Like the first person I talked to with fibromyalgia, I hung up the phone and I literally felt like I should like take off my shoes and kneel on the ground. Like
Mm.
this was a holy moment. Something
Wow.
magical had just happened. This is what I'm supposed to do.
Wow.
Right.
You found
So
your people.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And it was just, I don't know, just the synergy of what I know, having gone through it myself, and what I'm able to help people with. Like it was just magical and
Mm.
so much different, so much better than even just helping somebody with, you know, regular health stuff. Like there was just something special about it. And so I started working as a fibromyalgia coach. That was a term that I made up. And I did that for, several years, but I got to the point where I knew that I couldn't help everybody that needed help.
Mm.
There's millions of people with
Right.
fibromyalgia, and I just can't do it. So I started training people back in 2015, and that's when the Institute started. So, yeah.
Great. Yes. So for listeners, what is fibromyalgia?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think of fibromyalgia, the simplest answer is that it's a chronic pain condition, but of course it's more complex than that. And I think there's actually more that we don't know about fibro than we do know. And it's kind of like that proverb of the blind men and the elephant,
Mm.
where one person might say, "Oh,
Mm.
fibromyalgia is a sleep disorder," and one person might say, "No, it's a central nervous system thing." And it's, but we haven't really found what ties it all together yet.
Mm.
So, just in simple terms, fibromyalgia causes widespread body pain, but there's no actual damage in the body. It's just really our nerves misfiring. It causes brain fog, so we have a lot of cognitive dysfunction. It causes unrefreshing sleep and just, fatigue. And we just feel like we're one of those old cell phone batteries that says it's fully charged, but maybe lasts 10 minutes, you
Oh,
know?
yeah. Hmm.
So,
Yeah. Th- is there like an assessment or like a diagnostic tool that is
yeah,
used?
the right now fibromyalgia falls under the American College of Rheumatology, which, you know, between you and me and everybody else watching, I don't think that's really where it belongs, but that's where we thought that it belongs. It's got some criteria that are somewhat vague, right? So it's based on your symptoms, right? Your pain, your fatigue. It's based on whether or not we can find another reason for the pain and the fatigue, right? So we kind of have to rule a few other things out.
Mm-hmm.
And they do still use a little bit the assessment of the tender points. So there's 18 spots on the body that typically hurt for somebody with fibromyalgia. We're moving away from this a little bit because people can have fibromyalgia and not have very many tender points. This is actually some of the work that's been done out of OHSU and looking at how many tender points does a person need to have. And so now it's just a part of the criteria without being the entire criteria. So it can be difficult to get a diagnosis because it is so, vague and dependent on, well, have we checked for everything else?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Do with the vagueness, Tammy, is um are folks fibromyalgia patients, are they having difficulty um getting the treatment or the support that
Oh,
they
for
need from
sure.
their
Yeah.
doctors?
Yeah, definitely. Because there is always that, like, part of the diagnostic criteria is that there's no other explanation for the pain and the fatigue. Well,
Mm,
searching for everything,
mm,
like it could take forever. And how do you know that you've really checked it all? Right. So, for a lot of people who even get a diagnosis, there can be trouble with either doctors believing it or even the patient themselves believing that they have an accurate diagnosis.
mm,
There is a company who has come up with a blood test that checks for certain levels of cytokines in your blood and is supposed to be extremely accurate. However, it's, only a few years old, not even 10 years old at this point. And so there's limited data, right?
mm.
So we can kind of only trust it so far, and the longer we use it, the more accurate we might believe it to be. But for some people, that gives them what they need. But yeah, it can be really difficult because we don't it's not like you just go out and get a test, or like you and I were just talking about with sleep. It's not like you can have a sleep study and there's the readout that tells
Mm.
there's a lot of subjectivity to it, right? I mean, it's hard to measure somebody's pain, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's difficult.
Yeah. Do, um, so what uh is there is there a stigma with a fibromyalgia diagnosis?
Oh, for sure. For sure. For a long time, it was considered more of a psychosomatic illness.
Mm,
So, all in your head, something that you're making up. Or
right.
even if you didn't believe that somebody was lying about it, but just like an illness that our brain has made, right? And so there's this stigma around it being, quote, all in your head,
Mm,
right?
hmm.
And so that can be another really difficult thing for getting accurate treatment and diagnosis, is because there are still doctors who think this is more of a something you need to go see a mental health provider for than actual medical diagnosis. I see it most though with children. A
Mm,
lot of people do not want to give children a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. I actually have a student right now whose daughter is going through this,
wow.
and it's so difficult because if you don't get the right diagnosis, then how are you supposed to get treatment,
Mm,
right? And so when we don't want to label them, well, you're also preventing her from getting the help that she needs in some
wow.
ways. So,
I didn't even realize that uh children or teens can get fibromyalgia because I've worked with
yeah.
adults my whole career.
Yep, yep.
Oh.
And so if you've got a kid who's experiencing growing pains, that could very likely be fibromyalgia. In fact,
Wow.
there's doctors that I know that say there's no such thing as growing pains. It would be something else like fibro. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say, Tami, for someone who maybe it seems like they're getting like roadblocks,
Mm.
and like they're not getting the answers or the treatment that they're wanting.
Yeah, that's a really tough one. And I was actually one of those people. I did not
Mm,
get my fibromyalgia diagnosis until I got married and switched insurance.
wow.
Because the insurance that I had, HMO, they were really, really good at treating the things that fit inside their box. But if you had something outside the box, they didn't really know what to do with you. And
Mm,
so that was me. I was trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And when I finally got married, got different insurance, got to go to a different provider, then I finally got answers. And I think, unfortunately, that is all too common. And so for people who are running into those roadblocks, you might need to find new people for your team,
mm,
which is its own challenge. So that's where having somebody can who understands and can help you navigate that is really important. It's some of the work that we do as fibromyalgia coaches is helping our clients find good providers because it is not easy.
oh, okay. Yeah, great,
Yeah.
Tami. I'm just familiar with the way the HMO that I work with does things. For example, um, if you want to get evaluated for sleep, you need to see your primary care physician and get a referral. Is fibromyalgia world similar? Like you have to go to
Yeah,
your primary care doc
well,
for.
some of that is, playing the insurance game, right?
Mm,
So, depending on your insurance, you may or may not need a referral to go see a specialist. But in terms of fibromyalgia itself, it can just be difficult to find somebody who can diagnose you and or treat you. So, it's one of the top 10 diagnoses made in primary care. So, primary care providers can diagnose you if they actually know about it enough to like it's not something I would expect all primary care to really know about, but if you happen to have a primary care who has made a point of looking at this, which is how I was diagnosed, then a primary care can do it. Some rheumatologists will diagnose fibromyalgia, some will diagnose but not treat. Same thing with neurologists. Some will diagnose, but most will not actually treat it. There is not a particular fibro specialty. Like you can't go just find a fibro specialist
mm,
in your, insurance
mhm.
network. You won't find one.
Right.
But I would look just, primary care, functional medicine doctors, rheumatologists, neurologists, and really you have to kind of research them and look at websites, look at reviews, those kinds
Mhm.
of things, and see if this is somebody who actually understands fibromyalgia or not.
If they specialize or have
Yeah.
experience with that. Yeah.
Yep.
In sleep world, there's board certified sleep physicians.
Right.
But
We don't have that.
okay. Yeah.
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 Portland was very fortunate for a long time. One of the best fibro specialists, Dr. Ginevra Lipton, the Frida Center for Fibromyalgia was in Portland. Unfortunately, that closed earlier this year. Her
Mm,
goal is to hopefully teach more providers, which is good because then we'll have more than just her, kind of like me teaching coaches. But yeah, there's Portland is actually a great place to be for fibromyalgia. So.
mm, mhm. It is there a connection with our weather or location with fibromyalgia? I
You
I know
know,
mood is affected.
For
by
sure, for
current
sure. And it's really
medication.
interesting because they have done some studies looking at weather and fibromyalgia. And some of the studies have found zero connection between fibro symptoms and the weather. But it kind of depends on what they're looking at. Like, ask any fibro person and we'll say yes.
Mm, hmm.
Right? But some of the research says no, and I don't think the connection is so much with the particular weather, like is it sunny, is it rainy, is it hot, is it cold. I think it has more to do actually with the barometric pressure
Mm,
and the individual person's like just what they're like. We're all unique, right? What does their body like? I do not like heat, so I would be terrible in Arizona, and I love the Pacific Northwest, but I have clients who have literally moved to Arizona
hmm.
because they didn't do well with the cold and the
With the
rain.
cold. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So
The so it's uh it's the symptoms of fibromyalgia are significant. It really affects people's lives.
mhm.
Um, what are as a marriage counselor, I'm uh, fascinated or curious about how fibromyalgia or chronic pain impacts relationships. What
Mhm.
have you noticed, Tammy, in your coaching?
Well, I'll just start with myself. I was diagnosed about 6 months after I got married.
Oh,
And my husband, when we met, he was in Florida, I was in Portland. And so we had only spent a month in the same town before
mm.
we got married. So that was a little rough. And just, for us, I mean, at the time, of course, it was really distressing to me. But now looking back, I'm a lot more understanding about the fact that my poor husband was like, just, it's so hard to understand because
Mm.
one day I'm looking totally fine, can do the things I need to do. And the very next day, I'm like, oh, could you get me a glass of water? Or why are you parking so far from the door?
Mm.
It's like
Mhm.
one day I'm totally normal and the next day I'm totally helpless, So
Mm.
it just, for him, I'm sure, was such a challenge just trying to figure things out. And just recently, he's, kind of told me a little bit that, we all have these kind of criteria in our head for what we do and we don't want in a future spouse, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And he kind of came into our marriage and realized he had some of the things he didn't want,
Ah,
and it
yeah.
wasn't really so much
Mm.
me, like my personality being, drama queen or anything like that, but just I had a body that didn't always work the way that I wanted it to. My
Mm.
my body maybe was the drama queen, but like mentally, emotionally, I wasn't. But there were still very much good days and bad days. So I think that that uncertainty, I think, is actually probably the biggest challenge,
Mm.
more than
Mhm.
even the pain or the fatigue itself. And that can sure be challenging. But just how do we know? Is it a good day? Is it a bad day? And so with my clients, some of the things that I've done is I had one client who used a bowl of like decorative rocks. And that bowl kind of indicated how she felt. Like if it was full, she felt really good. And if it was empty, and when she felt really terrible, she said it gave her great pleasure to just dump those rocks out all over the table, you
Yeah.
know, giving her
As a way
husband
of
a visual.
expressing how
Mm-hmm.
she felt, just
Right,
empty.
because being asked every day, how's today? After a while, we just kind of like, whatever. I just don't want to answer this question anymore,
Mm.
But
Mhm.
giving some of those other visual clues, because it helps your family to know, is it a good day or a bad day? Because I'm going to maybe do more around the house, know that like maybe I, have to be the one to make dinner if you're the one that's not feeling good, right?
Mm.
Um, but asking all the time just
Yeah. Are
sometimes makes you feel worse.
are there support groups for family members? Like family
You know,
friends
that is
of
a great question.
fibromyalgia.
There have been several that I was even a support group leader for a while that we tried to do some meetings with family members and just never could quite get anything off the ground. So I don't think there is,
Mm,
but I do think that most support groups are welcoming guests. So if you want to learn more, to learn how you can be supportive, I mean, it's not as good for like getting your own support, but if you want to learn how to take care of somebody that you love who has fibromyalgia, if you want to understand them better,
mm.
then absolutely I would go to a support group or
Yeah.
yeah.
Now the your uh your coaching, do
Hmm.
you have an online component to it?
It's all online, actually.
Oh, uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I first became a coach, my fibromyalgia was not in remission. I was better enough to be able to help people, but I certainly wasn't all the way there. And
Mm,
I knew that even just for myself, I wanted to be able to, be there for my clients and whether it was a good day or a bad day, right? And I also knew that for my
mm,
clients, the times when they would need me the most would be the times where they felt terrible and they probably weren't going to want to go somewhere, get dressed up, whatever. But we could do a phone call.
mm,
So I actually do most of my coaching just plain old phone call. Zoom now, we're doing some,
mhm.
a lot of Zoom stuff, but I would say I do still have a couple of people, a couple of coaches who will meet with people in person, but almost all of us, it's all virtual.
Mm, mhm. So you've been doing the virtual uh
Long
coaching
time.
long before pandemic.
Oh, yes. I
Yeah.
became a coach in 2009. And so, pandemic hit, nothing about my business changed. I mean, obviously, like some of the conversations did, right? Like
Mm,
what we were talking about. And
yes.
some of my, live events that I might do changed. But, all of my regular classes and coaching just went on like normal.
Mm, mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's great. And um uh I'll ask you a little bit more about um training for folks who maybe want to explore or be a part of this area of coaching. But before we get into that, I'm curious, Tammy, um, what you've seen, uh, the relation in the relationship between mental health, like anxiety or depression, with fibromyalgia, because it sounds like there's a lot of overlap, and it seems like it
There
could just be
is.
confusing or
Oh,
overwhelming.
it is. It is. I like to think of the depression and anxiety sort of in two categories. One I think of as situational, which, I mean, let's be honest. If you're in a body that hurts all the time and doesn't do what you want it to do, like
Mm,
that can be depressing and that can cause anxiety. So I think there is a certain amount that fibromyalgia itself, just like the situation of it, right, it can contribute to those things. But then there's also, of course, the anxiety and depression that would exist regardless of the situation, right? So I think the situational type I don't worry too much about, because as we help people learn how to live with their new fibro bodies and help them find ways to manage their pain, have more energy, and just get better, then a certain amount of that is going to resolve itself, right? If you're depressed because I can't do the things I want to do, and we figure out how to get you back to doing them, then that alleviates that depression. But there is that other piece. And interestingly, a lot of the studies have shown that some of the contributing factors to fibromyalgia are also some of the same things that contribute to anxiety and depression. Like, for instance, if your serotonin is low, serotonin is involved in the processing of pain signals, right? So if you take an SSRI, then that isn't just because you're depressed. That's actually going to help your fibromyalgia by helping, your pain processing. Same thing with norepinephrine, right? It's a huge contributing factor to our brain fog and our energy levels, and it can also be a factor with anxiety and depression. Our poor sleep, of course. you know so I think there's a lot of overlaps in causality, and so then there's also overlaps with treatment, right?
Mm, yeah. So the so there's not just one solution, one key to
No.
for fibro getting better.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. You definitely have to find your recipe, as we talked about before. Talk about the right recipe for you. We all have all these various reasons that go together, comorbid conditions, right? Our life circumstances and just whatever deficiencies or imbalances your body might have. And so for me, fibromyalgia is it's a complicated. Sorry about that. That was Siri talking to me from my watch. Um, so for me, fibromyalgia is a complicated beast. It is an amplifier of everything else that might be going on. So we've got to
Mm,
make sure that we are addressing, if you've got low back pain, we've got to be addressing any, poor sleep. If you've got sleep apnea, we've got to look at all those other things that are causing pain, fatigue, brain fog, bad sleep. And then it's also its own thing. So we've got to like fix the amplifier itself, right? So
mm,
we've got to treat the fibro piece of it. And that combination of things for everybody is different. And I think a
mm.
lot of that has to do with the fact that we're still the blind men looking at the elephant, right? And we may find down the road someday, this is my honest belief, is that down the road we will find that there's different kinds of fibromyalgia, or some of what we're calling fibro is actually maybe something else. Kind of like diabetes, right? Like we have type 1, we have type 2, and they're the same but they're different. And I think we're going to find a similar kind of thing with fibromyalgia. So for now, absolutely, there is not one magic bullet. We've got to do a whole bunch of different things. And so if people are looking for the thing to fix their fibromyalgia, it's never going to work. Like it's just never going to work. There's actually a study in Italy where they looked at all the pharmacologic options for treating fibro, and one of the sentences in the abstract is that there is no one single medication that can address the constellation of symptoms that are fibromyalgia. So we've got to go at it from a bunch of different directions.
Okay. Yeah. So it can be complicated and not simple at all.
Yeah.
Um, uh, how do you help Tammy, or maybe you don't as a coach? Um, I'm guessing you do though. How do you encourage your clients when they're discouraged and overwhelmed, or like by the grief of what they're not able to do?
Yeah, so that is a great question. And you kind of touched on one of the challenges that we have being coaches, right? Because we are health coaches. Some of my people are actually life coaches. We're not doctors. We're not mental health providers. So occasionally I might have someone where I just am not what they need, or not. I might be a piece, but not the whole of what they need. And I might need to refer them to a counselor if there's, you know, fibromyalgia usually comes from some kind of trauma physical, emotional. It could be anything from a car accident to getting sick, or it could even be, in my case, it came because of chronic long term stress, but it could also be like physical abuse, mental abuse. So there is always some kind of trauma component, and sometimes, depending on that trauma, that has to be addressed with mental health providers. And so that deep grief that people might feel, depending on the nature of that, sometimes I can't be the one that helps. But most of the time I can. And the biggest way that I feel I help is just simply by being an example, right? Just I've been there. I filed for Social Security disability because of my fibromyalgia. I have been there. I'm also in remission today. And so that hope that there really, like, it is possible. There are ways to feel better. I think that for a lot of people is just, the break in the clouds that they need.
Mm, yeah. Can you describe, Tammy, what what is remission from fibromyalgia? Like, how will you know that you're better?
Yeah,
Like
so
what?
that is a really good question because that is not my word. That is my doctor's word.
Mm,
So I was just having a regular doctor appointment with the person who manages my fibro, who also managed my thyroid and a bunch of other stuff. And in the middle of some conversation about something else, she's like, "By the way, I consider your fibromyalgia to have been in remission for several years now." And I'm like, yeah, I don't even know what to do with that. It took me several months to really process what that meant for myself.
mm,
I can tell you that for me, what that looks like in my life, the last time I experienced any fibromyalgia pain of any kind was in 2018 when I had to stay in a hotel room and the bed wasn't very good. And the last time I had fibro pain before that, I was in London staying in a bed that wasn't very good in 2017. So, that's 4 or 5 years with no fibro pain. So for me, that's what remission looks like.
wow.
A lot of people, throw that term around, and I like to dig a little bit deeper because it's not the kind of thing where you're in remission for 6 months and then you have pain and then you're in remission for 6 months and then you have pain. That's like you still have fibro, you're just having flare-ups occasionally,
Mm,
right? But this is years without any fibro pain.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. The I I know you mentioned that it's not just one thing. What
Mhm.
were some of the things that were helpful for you?
Yeah, so there were some really key things that I can look back on and say, yeah, that was a big stepping stone, not just a little along the way. So one of them, of course, was working with my coach. It wasn't until I started working with a health coach that I was able to start doing all of the things that my doctor had been telling me for 2 years I probably should do.
Yeah.
My sleep habits, my, eating habits, all of those kind of just general healthy stuff. And then processing what it meant having fibromyalgia and how to manage my energy, manage my pain levels, and live in a fibro body. Like that was huge. So working with a coach was a big thing. It's why I train coaches because it's the thing that changed my life. The other big thing was when I had my sleep study and got my CPAP machine. I discovered that I don't actually have sleep apnea. I have upper airway resistance syndrome,
Hmm.
and so I was waking up 45 times an hour, and so getting good sleep was a huge piece for me. I discovered that I have autoimmune thyroid. I have Hashimoto's, and so getting my thyroid levels straightened out where they're supposed to be, that was another big piece.
Did that help with your fatigue? or
Fatigue and
energy
pain
and
both.
pain?
So one of the clues that pain can be thyroid is if it's mostly in the lower half of the body. So hips, legs, if it's mostly there, then it's often thyroid. And so for me, getting my thyroid in the right place kind of took out that piece of it. I still had pain at that time, but it decreased it significantly. And then yeah, the fatigue and brain fog and sleep, like all of it,
Okay.
right?
Yeah. I want to underline what you said about sleep. So upper airway resistance syndrome, sometimes it's described as like a mild form of sleep apnea. Be, but your sleep was disrupted 45 times per hour. That's severely disrupted. So I'm glad that you've mentioned that, because it's important for people to know that you can have upper airway resistance syndrome and still have very disrupted sleep. You don't have to have sleep apnea to have very disrupted sleep.
Right.
Um, Upper airway resistance syndrome, I like to describe it as moderate to loud snoring that disrupts your sleep, but it
Which
doesn't.
is funny because I didn't have any snoring.
Oh, you didn't have any snoring. Oh,
No, I
okay.
didn't.
Yeah.
So for me, it
You're a
was
unicorn, Tammy.
I was.
Yeah.
In fact, that the morning after my sleep study, my sleep doc was like, "You're the first person I have ever had that all of my awakenings were this. They weren't apneas, they were hypopneas, which I know
Yes.
means something to you.
Yes.
So yeah, it was for
Without
me.
snoring. That's fascinating.
No, I did not
Yeah.
have any snoring.
Yeah. So
So I didn't know. My
right.
husband didn't know. Nobody
Right.
knew. I just knew I
You
was
were tired and
exhausted and
exhausted.
yeah.
Yeah. See, the a hypopnea is where the obstruction or the narrowing of your airway doesn't completely block your airway, and it might not, it still might have like a 4% decrease in oxygen level. Um, some folks with upper airway resistance syndrome, they don't have a drop in their oxygen level, but on the sleep study, the brain waves, you can see that it's the alpha waves, the
Mm-hmm.
awakenings. And so um yeah, folks that have apnea, like pauses in their breathing, gasping, snorting, very loud snoring, like sometimes it can be very obvious, but sometimes it isn't.
No, no. And before I had my sleep study, before I was diagnosed, I an old job I had, we would sometimes like share rooms for travel, and
Mhm.
everybody always just commented on how quiet a sleeper I was,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
But instead of breathing through one of those fat milkshake straws or boba straws, right? I'm
Yes,
trying to breathe through one of those little coffee
a
stirrer
narrow one.
things.
Hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The so so s- sometimes it can take a while to um to for that to be uh apparent or obvious. And so uh when you got your sleep study, was it just to get to the source of how tired you were and fatigued?
So the first sleep study I had was not too long after I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and it's so common to have sleep issues with fibro that she sent me for a sleep study, but they didn't find anything. The next time I had a sleep study, it was because my husband had had a sleep study. I thought I wasn't sleeping because his snoring was keeping me awake.
Mm-hmm.
But after he got his machine and he was quiet, I was still waking up often.
Mm.
So that was really why I had that sleep study done, and they found all of this. So I don't know if the time spent in between, if like technology changed, what people were looking for changed,
Mm.
or if it was the clinic I went to. I don't really know, but
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was interesting to see that and just realize, well, yeah, duh, of course I'm tired.
Mm. Mm-hmm. With whether it's a sleep study or anything else, I want to say this for listeners is sometimes you might try something and then like it's there's nothing found, and then you can walk away discouraged, or say like, oh, I tried that
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't work. um uh just because you try something one time and it doesn't work doesn't mean you should give up on it.
That's right.
And
That's
so
right.
so uh whatever it is, keep going until you get the answers that you need.
Mm-hmm.
um and connect with the people that can help you.
Right. And I think in terms of something like fibromyalgia or really any condition like that that's a little bit um, less well known, it's important to find somebody who actually does know, right? Because there are things that we know, for instance, about fibro sleep that we might look at differently or whatever it is. Like sometimes the difference in something working or no results found is sometimes simply just in the way somebody's looking at the numbers, right? The number might be the same, but the person looking at it might look at it through a different lens and say, yeah, but for this, it's not right.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Now, I want to shift a little bit, Tammy, to okay. I have a diagnosis for fibromyalgia. Um, I'm working with providers on or a coach on managing the pain and the fatigue. Um, can you say a little bit about um when when someone's just overwhelmed, um
Mm.
and um and they're struggling with motivation or energy to do what they know they should.
Yeah, that's such an important thing. So so there's a couple of things there. So in terms of the overwhelm, sometimes the overwhelm is really like I have to fix everything, but yet I can't start with everything. So where
Mm,
do I start, right?
mm,
And in that, I usually kind of look at things from I kind of ask a couple of questions. So first of all, you know, what's the low-hanging fruit? Right? Like what would be the easy thing to start with right now? Just to start, just to get a little bit better, right? So what's the low hanging fruit?
mm,
Sometimes I also will think about, well, what's the biggest bang for your buck? But sometimes that thing feels really hard because it's typically bigger and harder, right? But sometimes, you know, people have the motivation and the will to do that, then you know you can look at what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. Sometimes you can even ask your providers, like, where do you think I should start? Like, I can't do all of this, so where do you think I should start? And the whole idea there is just to like get a little bit, give yourself just a little bit more energy, a little bit better sleep, a little bit less pain, gives you a little bit of space to be
mm,
able to then do a little bit more. So
mm,
that's kind of how I handle the overwhelm, and I really think that working with somebody like a coach can be really helpful there because it just to ask you the questions, right? And to talk it through with you and figure out where that tiny piece is that you can start with. In terms of motivation, that one is really for me always more about biochemistry than it is about anything else,
mm,
because we can only go so far white knuckling it. You know, just like holding on, I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it. Like
mhm,
that'll only take you so far and then you just can't anymore. And so
mm,
for me, this is one of the areas that my depression actually shows up as not even wanting to do the things that I would normally enjoy, right? So for me, making sure that I take supplements that help boost my norepinephrine is absolutely key for me to like really keep going. So when I'm working with clients on this, I will a lot of times ask questions. Okay, well, why aren't you doing it? Do you want to and things are getting in the way, right? Is this a strategy issue, right? Like, I'm not working out because it's the end of the day and I'm tired. Maybe we start in the morning and then maybe it works. So, those kinds of things. Or is it like I want to, but I just kind of can't seem to get the oomph? That's when I would be like, okay, there might be some neurochemistry that needs some help here, and taking some supplements or working with
Mhm.
your provider if you are on certain SNRIs or something like that, that can help.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
that's kind of how I
I
look
like
at
that.
them.
Yeah. Like uh, if I wasn't depressed, I'd be doing all the things.
Right,
I don't
exactly.
want to say, I don't want to admit that because I already have fibromyalgia. Like it's too much.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
But just give I would yeah, giving yourself permission to um it like acceptance is not that you like it. Acceptance is just
Right.
acknowledging the realities of what you're dealing with.
Yes,
So that
I like using the example of like setting your GPS, right?
mm,
You have to know where you want to go, right?
mm,
Like, am I going to Vancouver, BC, or am I going to New York?
mm,
But you also have to really know where you are, because the directions to New York from Portland are different than from Florida.
mm,
Right?
mhm,
So for me, that acceptance piece is really just simply about, how do I set my GPS? Where am I right now? What is the body that I'm living in right now capable of? Right? And
love that.
and not necessarily making that mean anything. It's just where I am right now.
Mm,
And then I can go about, what can I do to maybe change that? But if you aren't honest about where you're at, then it's just so much harder.
mm.
So much harder.
That's really helpful. I like
Yeah.
that. I like
Yeah.
that, Tammy. Um, so as we start to wind down our time for today, thank you so much for doing this today.
Yeah.
We mentioned it, but Tammy and I we also did an episode about sleep for her podcast. So I'm going to be including the link for that in our show notes and on the YouTube channel. Um, for uh, w- one thing I'm wondering about is what's exciting for you uh, these days with
Mm.
the work that you do.
So the most exciting thing is always watching people get better. So
Mm-hmm.
I just got an email over the weekend from a woman I talked to a week or two ago who really wanted to go on this trip and then wasn't sure if she physically could do it. And
Mm.
so our coaching call was all about ways that she could make that work for her. And then getting an email from her with a picture from her on her trip, that
Oh,
it was a fabulous trip and she had a great time. And,
mm.
that is what's exciting for me. But
Yes.
aside from that, there are a bunch of really cool things that are happening in the fibro world right now. So, there, of course, are people who are doing research. One of the most interesting bits of research that has come out, actually last year, I think it was, sometime in the last year or so, was actually finding that fibromyalgia might have some type of autoimmune component, which for years we thought it did, and then we thought it didn't, and now it's looking like maybe it does again.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So, some researchers in London using mice with fibro type symptoms and gave a particular antibody. Um, it just, watching what happened and having symptoms and then not having symptoms kind of confirmed for them that there might be a autoimmune component. So be, you know, with a lot of this research, it's like we learned a little piece of that elephant, but it doesn't necessarily mean we have a treatment or anything yet. It's
Mm.
just we're learning a little bit more about that elephant. So that I thought was super interesting. There have been a bunch of people who are still working, still looking. So even if the people out there with fibromyalgia or even providers who are looking at, do we have any new medications or anything like that? No, we don't, not yet. But we are learning more about that elephant, and there's people working on it, even if you can't see it. So that is super exciting. The other
Mm-hmm.
thing that's happening, and I don't know if you even know this, but in December, we are having the premiere of a fibromyalgia documentary called Invisible. I happen
Mm,
to be one of the executive producers of the film,
wow.
and it's been something we've been working on for 7 years. It is finally
Wow.
coming out in December,
Wow.
so it's really cool, and it's really showing the full spectrum of fibromyalgia.
Mm,
There are people in the film like me, where my fibromyalgia is in remission, and there are people in the film who are unable to work because of their fibro. So it really shows the full spectrum and a lot of the different kinds of treatment options. So we're really excited about that.
wow, that's great. And
It'll be a great tool.
will it be like on Amazon Prime and YouTube and things like that?
Yes, we don't have that all worked out just yet, but I'll make sure you know about it so you can update your notes. But yeah, we're planning on it being where people can stream it somehow, some way. And so it'll be a great resource for both for patients to see, but I think it'll also be a really great thing to share with people who just want to understand more, whether that's, providers or family members and friends. I think it'll just be a really great tool and hopefully give people some hope for what's available and what can happen.
That's really exciting. Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
definitely be sharing that with the health and wellness team at Kaiser
Yeah.
Permanente.
Awesome.
Yeah. Um, uh, a- as we wrap up, Tammy, can you share a little bit more about the training you do
Yeah.
at uh for coaches or folks who are interested in coaching?
Absolutely. So, the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute, we are training people primarily who want to become coaches and do the kind of work that I do. But we also, I would say about half of our students are either just patients who want to learn as much as they can so they can be their best selves, and also other types of providers who just want to understand fibromyalgia more and better. So our first class is a 9 session class. We call it the Certified Fibromyalgia Advisor because I don't actually teach how to do any coaching in that, but it teaches you all of the fibro information. So we talk about how to manage pain, fatigue, sleep, uh, exercise, nutrition, brain fog. Like we cover all of those things and talk about both the medication options, supplements, lifestyle things, like how patients can manage themselves better.
Mhm.
So for people who are are already coaches or people who are providers in another way but feel a gap in their fibro knowledge, this class would be great for you. And then for people who graduate from that and then do want to become fibro coaches, we have a coach class as well. But the advisor class is really the first place to start because it teaches you all the fibro part of things. So
Mm-hmm. And these
yeah.
trainings are online.
Yes, they're all online over Zoom. We use an online classroom for like the homework assignments and quizzes and stuff like that. But the lectures are all done via Zoom. So yeah, right now I have a student in California, I have a student in Dubai, and a student in Texas,
Wow.
all in the same class. So
Yeah.
finding time zones sometimes is challenging, but yeah,
Wow.
it's great.
Great. That's great. Thank you again, Tammy, for coming on the podcast. It's been great to learn more about fibromyalgia and the work that you do.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been so much fun to like actually meet you after, being Facebook friends for so long and to be able to learn from you and share with you. So, thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thank you, and I'll be keeping an eye out for the documentary later this year. Bye bye.